Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. There are really two things that we're looking to do today. What I'm going to do first is address the most recent announcement that former Attorney General Loretta Lynch has been hired by Northwestern University to conduct an additional investigation. So I will make some comments about that. And then we want to introduce to you one of our many outstanding clients, one who has a story to tell that in many ways is similar to what we've already heard from others, and in other ways is unique and adds more to the story in terms of some of the things that have occurred within the Northwestern University Athletic Department over a long period of time. And I'll allow my co-counsel Parker Steiner to introduce Ramon, who's standing here to my right. But before I do, to comment on yesterday's announcement that former Attorney General Loretta Lynch will be conducting an investigation. First, I believe that this is a showing that there is a recognition at Northwestern University that this problem went beyond the football program. Quite clearly, we know that there was an investigation that seemed specific to the football program that ultimately led to Pat Fitzgerald's suspension and then subsequent termination. But this investigation seems to be broader in scope, which is very important because this cultural problem within the university's athletic department was broader in scope than just the football program, and certainly the revelations about the football program, in light of it being the football program, is what has shined a spotlight on these problems that permeated beyond the football program. And so that recognition is because Northwestern does have knowledge as to what's gone on over time. And now they have an independent investigator who, as they've said, will make the findings public when it's concluded, which brings us back to the investigation into the football program, where the findings have not been made public, which we continue to seek. We have not been provided a copy. Obviously, the public has not been. To the extent there are confidentiality concerns, names can be redacted, information can be redacted to protect whatever must be protected. However, release of more than just the executive summary is still very important for transparency here, and we continue to demand that that occur. As it relates to Ms. Lynch's investigation going forward, we have a number of clients. There are, of course, other law firms that have a number of clients who have come forward either anonymously or with their names in the public or on lawsuits. And we certainly encourage Ms. Lynch to talk to these folks, and we look forward to cooperating in various ways, because these are stories that need to be heard through whatever outlet they must, through the litigation process, but also through this internal investigation, so that Northwestern can, in essence, cleanse itself of the problems they've had for a very long time and move forward in a much better way, because our clients are very interested in their alma mater moving forward in a better way, bettering themselves, and ensuring that this doesn't happen to young people going forward anymore. And so with that, I'll let my co-counsel, Parker Steiner, introduce our wonderful client, Ramon.
Thank you, Pat. Good morning. Later this morning, a lawsuit will be filed on behalf of Mr. Diaz, who you'll hear from shortly. This story and the depth of this story continues to evolve day by day, week by week, based on the number of clients that we're communicating with and the stories we're hearing. Thus far, and I understand why, there's been the shock factor around the sexualized hazing in this case. The stories that we've heard certainly shock individuals that hear them. But I think there's a large component as far as the culture at Northwestern and within the athletic department that's been overlooked. And that's the racism, the bigotry, and the hazing based on race. And Mr. Diaz's complaint will demonstrate the culture that was tolerated within the athletic department, and what you'll hear from him shortly demonstrates that. And I hope that the media continues to cover this story and doesn't just focus in on the sexualized hazing component, but the big picture that was tolerated within the athletic department, and certainly the racism and bigotry that you'll hear shortly from Mr. Diaz.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted an opportunity to share my story. I've done it a number of times. I do have a lot to say. I hope that I don't do my very best to be as brief as I can, but I have a lot to say because I've been thinking about this for over 10 years. Things that have played out in significant ways in my life, mentally, emotionally. My family's been impacted, so I love the opportunity. Thank you, Parker and Patrick, for giving me the opportunity to share. Deeply privileged. So I want to just share a little bit about my background. So my name is Ramon Diaz. I was born and raised in Illinois. I played on the offensive line for Northwestern University from 2005 to 2008. Presently, I'm a clinical therapist. I'm licensed in Illinois. I've specialized training in the areas of complex trauma, different areas of what they would refer to as dialectical behavioral therapy, and then, of course, drug counseling therapy as well. I'm currently working on a PhD in neuropsychology. So what that generally means is that I'm studying areas of psychological science, theory, theoretical psychology, and neuropsychology, of course, and I plan to teach as a college professor when I'm finished. That's the hope. James Patton, I believe, groomed me as a high school junior and a senior to persuade me and my family that my well-being would be prioritized. While I played football at Northwestern University, we welcomed James Patton into my house. He told us a story. It was framed in a way that I thought, and my parents thought, that I would receive an excellent education and I would be treated for the human being that I am, and not just for my skill level or what I could produce on the field. My experience playing football at Northwestern University haunts me to this day. I never will forget the mistreatment that I experienced for those 4 years. As a freshman, I was forced to participate in what my teammates called the car wash. You can imagine, so the car wash, you've heard in some fashion or another, but I'll just give you my experience of it. What I will say, again, as a clinical therapist, the brain of a younger teenager, so the brain of a very young person like myself, when I first came to Evanston, Illinois, I was very excited. And to expect someone like me to understand the magnitude emotionally, mentally, what was going to happen to me. When I walked in that shower, when I was forced to rub against other bodies, completely nude in the shower, where their bodies would be up against mine, their genitalia would be up against mine. It's really hard to fathom. And as a parent myself now with 3 children, I can't imagine to describe these situations to any family, any parent, let alone a child. Children trust their coaches to keep them safe. I trusted my coaches not to lead me into situations where I felt like my autonomy was violated. Abuse that I suffered emotionally and mentally is impossible to measure. As I said before, the moment, if I were to find out that this would happen to one of my kids, anything regarding hazing or abuse, I would demand accountability from everybody all the way up to the administrative positions or administrative team for that school or wherever my children are at. Being infuriated, I think, is an understatement. And I think for me, certainly as a therapist as well, I can't believe what Mr. Yates and others who have come out and what they've experienced, what they must be feeling at this moment in time as well. Parents are being betrayed. For me, I believe parents are being betrayed at Northwestern University by coaches, staff, trainers, and people in administrative roles. I remember distinctively sitting in a chair as well as a freshman coming in at Kenosha, Wisconsin, where we have camp. As a young man, I had no idea what was going to happen. But to be put into a room where I had my teammates surrounding me, and then I wasn't asked, but I was forced into a chair by upperclassmen. And to imagine what was going to happen next is really hard to explain. And especially as a young man, as an 18-year-old, I can't, in hindsight, even looking back now, it's hard to understand why would somebody choose that symbol that was shaved in the back of my head, Cinco de Mayo. As I've played this out in my life for the last 10 years or so, longer, I often ask myself, why that symbol? Why me? Could have chosen anything. And that's what you decided to do. These seniors that were part of this, and everybody that was there, people watched, and no one did anything. Who believed the standard upheld a person's human dignity? Who decided that this was the standard to take care of athletes, people who we admired and respected as the upperclassmen, and obviously the coaches who allowed this to happen? For me, I demand that someone take accountability for what they allowed to happen to me during my freshman year. Living on dirt floors is something I'm proud to talk about when I share with people the living conditions my father lived in Mexico. I'm proud to be my father's son, and I am a Latino American. The harsh living conditions my father endured reminds me of the virtues he instilled into me: character, integrity, and resiliency. Brett Ingalls, you insulted my family's cultural heritage. You said on many occasions that even though I grew up on dirt floors, we don't live like that here. Those words ring true to me like they happened yesterday. There's never been a day that it's gone by since I graduated in 2008 where I have not forgotten those words. I've not seen a football game in over 10 years because of what happened to me and the treatment I suffered under Brett Ingalls, and the teammates that were surrounded him continued to laugh, and no one stopped it. Adam Cushing was there as well, oftentimes, and joined in the laughter. What would possess any human being, anyone, that's okay, that wouldn't ruin somebody's life? And it certainly did for me. Bigotry that I suffered chipped away at my self-worth, my dignity, and my desire to play the game of football. A game I loved, a game I trained for, thousands and thousands of hours, to then become a center of excessive, over and over forms of bigotry and racism. As a result of the bigotry and racism and emotional abuse I suffered, I attempted to commit suicide by abusing painkillers in 2007. Statements that repeatedly violated my human dignity led to a great deal of psychological suffering. It's really hard to explain in words what my family's had to see me go through for the last 10 years, what my wife has had to see me go through. She knows better than anybody. Even after I began to see a psychologist on campus in 2007, the abuse, alienation, and racism did not stop. Having to face my perpetrator or perpetrators, Brett Ingalls, and all of my offensive line teammates that sat in that room for over 3 years, what that did is it allowed my depressive symptoms and suicidal thoughts to increase. An institution that enables coaches to destroy the self-worth of an athlete must be held accountable. No one stopped it. I think that's worth repeating again and again. No one did anything. Northwestern University and the Board of Trustees create an environment that enables perpetrators disguised as coaches to groom, exploit, and violate the human dignity of many of their players of color. The culture of abuse, bigotry, and racism that exists within Northwestern University and the athletic department, I think, appeared immediately the moment Mr. Yates and others came forward. Perpetrators deny, gaslight, and utilize what we often call cognitive distortions, ways to suppress the voice of the victims of abuse. I'll give an example. Hazing is not tolerated at Northwestern University. Rather than validating the experience of these young men and women, and many others who I believe will come forward, rather what we have told these athletes, these brave souls, is that none of it happened. Lying to evade accountability must not be accepted. Psychological abuse increases if victims, in our case, more athletes who come forward, continue to speak up. The suppression will continue. These athletes will continue to be harassed. They'll continue to be told that what happened was exaggerated, didn't happen the way you thought it would, which is common language for perpetrators. No one has the right to control another person. What you're seeing right now is a significant effort to discredit victims of abuse, undoubtedly re-traumatizing most of them, if not all of them. We are close to the truth, and people who allow this abuse to occur are getting nervous. I believe that's the case. The truth will come out. As a therapist, I believe mechanisms are in place that maintain racism, bigotry, mental and emotional abuse that I think goes on across the country in sport programs. College athletes every day suffer hazing in the form of mental and sexual abuse, racism, and bigotry. I believe the NCAA has to get involved. I believe that the governing bodies here need to be held accountable. I see this often in my office with patients, athletes who have been abused even at the high school level. And no one's willing to take accountability. Families across the country have the right to protect their children. Families and parents, please get involved and hold the NCAA, sport programs, collegiate programs accountable. I urge each and every one of you who are listening to this, families who have been impacted by this because their kids have went through similar or at least more egregious acts of abuse and violence. I just want to end with this. College athletes, not only at Northwestern University, but across the country, I urge all of you, I plead with you to seek out your own legal representation, to file lawsuits in your own state. I believe, and being in the field that I'm in now, this is widespread. The incident is not just at what we're seeing at Northwestern University is just a microscopic view of what we see often in the media throughout the country. Please take the first step and contact a lawyer. I know breaking the code of silence can seem really scary. I know many my former athletes who refuse to come forward as I'm talking today because of the fear of the backlash they receive on social media, former teammates, and possibly even coaches. Worse yet, even their communities, who would even tell them that didn't happen. There's no way that would happen at Northwestern University or anywhere else as prestigious as Northwestern University. No one has the right to violate your human dignity. No one has the right to devalue anyone else because of your race, ethnicity, or skill level. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're the individual that's going to go to the pros in any sport you play. And it doesn't matter if you're the player who doesn't see the field, the mound, whatever it is, basketball court. Everyone deserves a great sport experience. No one, I hope by me coming out and speaking on behalf of many athletes, that they wouldn't experience what I've experienced for the last 10 and a half years or so. We support you. We stand with you, those who want to speak. Please come forward. I refuse to allow lies to be turned into truths. I think that's worth repeating. I refuse to allow lies to be turned into truths. The culture of abuse, bigotry, sexual exploitation, and racism exists at Northwestern University. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll open it up to questions in a few moments. What we've seen in this case is a culture at Northwestern that abused young individuals. And we hear about stories like the car wash. And that shocks us. That shocks us when you hear about it in your living room. And you can think about your own children or friends' children or nieces and nephews or other young individuals going through that. But sadly, in our society as a culture, when we hear stories about racism, unfortunately, it doesn't have the same shock factor. But what we're hearing from Mr. Diaz, and you'll see in his complaint, is you have a young individual whose parents worked so hard to raise him into just a brave, excellent young man, to be recruited by Northwestern, And his parents were promised that if he comes to Northwestern, that the coaches will be his parents away from home, that will take care of your son. And as a freshman joining this program, so excited, he was sat in a chair with his head shaved, and Cinco de Mayo was written in the back of his head. And as Mr. Diaz shared, they could have wrote anything in the back of his head. Anything in the world. But what hurt him the most, what stung the most, and this is why they did it, was attacking his heritage. And that's the culture that was tolerated at Northwestern. You have coaches that are making racial comments and slurs to players like Mr. Diaz and so many others. This wasn't just player-on-player hazing or player-on-player racial comments. This was a culture that was tolerated within the athletic department that's unacceptable and disgusting. And for it to go on in 2006, 7, 8, and even today in 2022, and as we've seen by Mr. Gates and other lawsuits, this is an athletic department that has enabled and promoted this behavior and culture that has unfortunately harmed so many young individuals. If anyone has any questions, I'll have Mr. Diaz step back in.
Usually the girl from Deadspin. The question I had for you, Ramon, did Northwestern have anyone set up that you or anyone else on the team could go to, that you felt you could go to, and if not, why not?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So again, I have a lot more language around this now, right, as a therapist and someone who studies the mind pretty much every waking hour of my day. A culture of abuse that's composed of people who disguise themselves as coaches, really who are perpetrators. The psychological abuse and control does not allow anybody, including myself, to feel like you could go to anybody without those same statements coming back somehow to your position coach, or even further, obviously, to the head coach. I didn't have anything else but a scholarship. I didn't have an important job waiting for me. I was the first natural-born American citizen of my family. I knew that I had everything to lose. I don't know if that helped answer your question.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
What did it take for you to go before these cameras today? This has been brewing for a while, and how do you feel about the others who have been able to stand in front of public and say this?
Yeah, I felt compelled when I felt the young men and women who have come forward to be an advocate for them, and I felt also what I'm saying today is something I've replayed in my mind for a long time, and even players that I've played with, we've been talking about these incidences for over 10 years, and so when the letter that was allegedly written by the entire college football team, I'm not sure who that was, I'm not sure who wrote it, that is a form that is indicative of the culture of abuse that exists in Northwestern University. You violated and you invalidated the experiences of these brave souls. I can't imagine what they're even feeling even today. I'm sure they've been attacked on social media. Again, I don't can speculate, but I imagine that's the case. And I wanted to stand with them, and I believe it was right. I've gone through the healing journey. I don't want that. I don't want others to have to go through what I had to go through.
When you endure racial discrimination, the pain is apparent, but describing it is really hard. You didn't feel like you could say anything right there, just how wrong that was for them to happen to you.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the same comments with regards to the culture of abuse. The systematic, methodical, psychological control does not even make that available for kids, for young men and women who are part of a culture that is so systemic, that's filled with these parameters. Where, as Mr. Yates said, I confirm the same testimony that you didn't feel like you could tell anybody because it could go back to somebody who could lose playing time. And I know when I was seeing the psychologist in 2007, I wasn't really talking about the root cause of what was really happening, because I wanted to play. And again, someone who doesn't have anything to lose, or has everything to lose, I could not afford to say anything that might jeopardize my scholarship.
So when Coach Fitzgerald was let go, but the rest of the coaching staff remained, how did you feel about that?
I believe a culture of abuse exists at Northwestern University, and the mechanisms, the agents that are in place create this environment.
So it's still going on. You feel that?
There are probably people within the athletic department that are still employed that enabled this culture. Terminating Coach Fitzgerald was probably the first step with changing the culture at Northwestern. And this is part of the reason that myself and Mr. Salvi demand that the university release and publish the unedited investigation that's already taken place. Because my assumption is that investigation identifies other individuals who enabled this culture. So to Mr. Diaz's question, I don't know if the culture is continuing on over the last 30 days, but 35 days ago, my assumption is that a culture that tolerated hazing, racism, bigotry was still in existence. And I believe there are still other individuals within the athletic department that were responsible for creating that culture.
Are you talking about the investigation that's underway by Northwestern right now, or what
The
details?
Arndt Fox investigation,
Okay,
the independent investigation that for whatever reason they're refusing to publish.
okay.
And I have my suspicions as to why it's not being published. And as Mr. Salvi said, we think it's great that Ms. Lynch is now going to conduct an investigation, and I assume that investigation will be of the entire athletic department and the culture within the athletic department. But I also assume that the investigation that's already taken place that led to the executive summary was very specifically focused in on the football program. And when dozens upon dozens of interviews were conducted, I assume there were other names mentioned besides Coach Fitzgerald. And I, like others, on behalf of survivors of abuse, alumni, faculty, and the public, demand that Northwestern publishes that before the football season begins.
And I have one question for Mr. Diaz. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned you want the NCAA involved and the governing bodies held accountable. Can you talk about what accountability looks like for you?
I believe that Professor Elizabeth Hurd and Kate and others, the 260 faculty who signed the open letter that was sent to President Schill, I think encapsulates most of my sentiments, which is a third party, someone who does not report at all to the university, that is composed of people like psychologists, people that I'm friends with. Not necessarily doesn't have to be me or anyone else, but anyone who does not have any direct impact or influence on the third party. What does that look like? What is a vetting? What we know is that there's a vetting process that's taking place to identify coaches. What is that vetting process? Who identifies the standards to say that this coach is allowed? I can tell you from my personal experience, if people ask me today, are your kids going to play sports? I'm not even sure if I want them to play sports right now, because I know how widespread this issue is. And and the research only suggests that very strongly, of what we're allowing to happen in the U.S. in terms of the abuse that goes on very young age. And I see this all the time in my office. And I get very adamant about this point because I have to then help parents cope with their children who are depressed, suicidal, already very young, as early as 5 years old, 6 years old. So who are these people that are beginning this vetting process? What are the standards? What's the criteria? I have my opinions, but that would be place to start. I think that open letter suggests quite a bit. I really appreciate their comments. So,
Mr. Diaz.
To what extent, as a parent, as a student, were you aware of any sort of activity like this going on in other schools from your crossing paths with other players?
when I was getting recruited as a junior and senior, this was going on everywhere. It's widespread. People were, I very specifically remember going on my recruiting visits And I was told, to me personally, again, I can't speak for anybody else, but for me personally, I was told I didn't even have to go to class at some of these schools. I could just go, I could show up and play football and somebody would do my homework for me. So I think, again, as a therapist and someone who spends a great deal of time of helping people adapt and acquire the life skills that's necessary to just be a person living among the community, any community that is, these life skills are not being given to these kids. They're not being trained to be men and women that can live in communities to contribute to the common cause.
Specifically, some of the hazing activity, though, were you aware of that? Personally, were you aware of that at other schools?
The specific hazing, I just know that it was, I wouldn't say specific hazing. What I will say is that violence, things that were being covered up of the behaviors that were deviant among players that I knew personally. So everyone knew this was going on behind closed doors, and it was being covered up by programs. And I can specifically give examples where this was the case. I had a friend who was at Ohio State. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Mr. Diaz, I think you're the oldest former player to
Mhm.
speak about this. Can you talk about how the hazing is this long-term issue? There's a lot of similarities between what you went through
Yeah.
and these other players are talking about. And also, can you tell us your age?
I'm 36. What I will say is that in 2006, there was a hazing incident that occurred with the women's soccer team. And I was there for that. I know some of the players who were on that team. The question I have is that I've been wrestling with since all these stories have broken out and the hazing allegations at Northwestern University is, what changed in 2006? That's a question that hasn't been answered. I don't have an answer to that, but what has not changed seems to be at least implied in some regards to some of the evidence that's out there that alleges that the hazing is still going on. It's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yeah, it's the reason I pursued mental health. I believe that it's so widespread that I wanted to be an advocate at every level. And as a parent, I understand that even more in a very personal way, how this impacts not only the athlete, but family, parents, eventually relationships as they get into adulthood. Trauma is significant and has such acute impairment to the brain. And it has implications that's hard to really describe or measure and how it impacts everybody around them, even to the point of I know athletes who won't even return to their communities because they're so full of shame and embarrassment if they didn't, quote unquote, make it or become successful. You know, what harm that brings to communities. As a parent who loves, as a person who loves my community, I can't imagine feeling embarrassed not to come back, to feel like you can't be accepted. And all that's due to the abuse, that happens to these athletes. And it's a shame to see what happens to them long term.
Question for the attorneys. Can you talk about how confident are you that this investigation by Ms. Lynch will be credible and independent?
Sure. Well, we, after the announcement yesterday, despite some of the failings that we think Northwestern has had, both in terms of not only the culture over a long period of time, but the transparency with respect to various investigations that have taken place, while on the one hand, we're not naive, on the other hand, we want to maintain some optimism that this is an important step in moving forward. I mean, when Ramon and others talk about accountability, I think what the most important aspect of accountability here is that it's not temporary. And so what we have seen over the course of years at Northwestern, and as we've gotten client calls and talked about their stories and some of the aftermath of various hazing incidents, is that in certain ways the consequences have escalated, but they've done it in such a way. And what I mean by that is coaches have been suspended, coaches have been fired, and we've seen that. We saw that with the baseball team, we saw it with the cheerleading squad, we saw it with, of course, the football team, and we've seen it in other sports as well. And so these are actions that on their face appear to say, hey, we want to hold people accountable. The question is, what's next? And when players that have stepped forward and spoken up, even after these incidents, are retaliated against, or when the culture just kind of falls back in line with what it had always been, even after some of these suspensions or other consequences that Northwestern has imposed, that doesn't change the culture. So that's why this needs to be a widespread effort. And certainly our hope is that this investigation by former Attorney General Loretta Lynch is towards that end. And I think time will tell. I think as we go through this process, to the extent that we are included and to the extent we get to the end and we see what the public release is, I think that'll tell us whether or not this is serious, and we certainly have cautious optimism that it will be.
Do you expect a written report?
Well, all I saw from the release yesterday is that the report will be made public. So I fully anticipate a written report will be made public. That was certainly the implication as I read it.
Is she the right person for the job?
I don't know if I'm the person to answer that question. Obviously, she's an incredibly high-profile person. Her history is impeccable. There's no question about that. And in looking at her bio, she has delved into college athletics and looked into what appeared to be at least somewhat similar instances at other schools. So I hope the answer is yes, John, and I think time will tell.
And I'll just share one point that I talked about earlier. We've seen at Ohio State with Dr. Strauss, they conducted an internal investigation. We saw at University of Michigan with Dr. Anderson. And the internal investigations really shine light on the culture and events and name individuals that participated in enabling this culture. And I don't challenge Mrs. Lynch's investigation. My concern is it will take numerous months. We're talking about a number of different sports programs spanning numerous decades. These survivors, the public, faculty, and alumni, deserve transparency today. And in Northwestern's hands right now is an investigation that they commissioned that has already taken place, that they already have the results of that investigation. Why can't they publish that now? They can still move forward with Mrs. Lynch's investigation of the entire athletic department, whatever she's commissioned to do. But why can't they release the investigation that's already been conducted? And why can't they do it before football season starts?
Can you bring us up to date on how many lawsuits have been filed and are filing, how many athletes represent that talk to you?
Sure. So we have, I think it's roughly 24 clients. We have many more who have come forward, and for a lot of the reasons that Ramon has stated, it's hard for them to come forward, hire a lawyer, and decide whether or not to file a lawsuit, to decide whether or not to even hire a lawyer. And so that is certainly part of this, and I think when they hear Ramon speak and others speak, that provides them with a little bit more courage, a little bit more strength. There is strength in numbers to know that, hey, you weren't the only one that experienced this. You're not the only one that's stepping forward. You have others too. And so we expect that to continue, and we've seen that continuing over the last few weeks. And we've filed several lawsuits, and Ramon's will be one, of course, that has his name on it as opposed to a John or Jane Doe. But there are many more to come. So, fourth. Yeah. Anything else?
We've heard from a number of people that I don't know that anybody's necessarily addressed the question as to what impact the alleged abuse had on your athletic career in the school
During the time or now?
during the time.
So it was repeated feelings and experience of alienation, segregated from the offensive line group. The psychological abuse was frequent, almost daily. I did not participate in most of any events off campus or off the field with those same teammates.
Did that have a negative impact on your growing up athletically?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah, I believe that. I suffered some injuries, and then that only made, I believe, the abuse to increase, and just the marginalization became extensive, and it just became more and more. I think the level of intensity continued to increase. It was not something that I saw stop until I decided, and it was one of the reasons why I did not come back for a fifth year, for personal reasons. And again, I could not even share. I didn't even feel comfortable sharing with the coaches why I wanted to leave. So when you're in that level of abuse, you just want, as I work with patients every day now, they just want to remove themselves from that situation. They want nothing to do with the perpetrator. They never want to talk about it. And as I said before, I haven't watched a football game in over 10 years, a full game, because of the re-traumatization that I would experience. So, yes, ma'am. Yeah, so then I completed a master's, and then I'm currently working on a PhD. Yeah. I'm sorry? Yes, elsewhere. Yeah. I did not want to. I moved. The last image I had from playing, the way I often depict it is, I snuck into the locker room to grab my belongings when nobody was there, and I left. I didn't participate in my graduation ceremony. I did not want to walk. I didn't get a gown. I got my diploma sent to me to my house, and I wanted just to move back and be with my family. The memories that I have associated with the title Northwestern University is for the most part very re-traumatizing. Yeah.
How old are you now?
36. Yes. Hi.
I'm Claire from the I'm just wondering if your mental health struggles that you described in university, if that helped you towards your current career in psychology therapy.
Yeah, I have fully committed my life to understanding the way trauma, among other things, impacts the brain, the physical body, and what we know it has devastating effects, impairments that last for many people the rest of their life.
Did that stem from what had happened?
Absolutely, yeah, without a doubt.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. And certainly we'll be keeping folks advised as we move forward with this litigation and any further developments. So thank you.